In tonight's episode, I'm going to be reading 5 strange, mysterious, and creepy, allegedly true park ranger stories. Let us begin. Let me just say that before I get into the details of what I saw, I want to tell you that your YouTube is very interesting and has greatly made me respect what Skinwalkers are more and more after hearing so many encounters. Around 10 years ago is when it all started. While camping at the Tonto National Forest here in Arizona, a friend and I were hiking through the woods at around 10:30 p.m. We had camped near some waterfalls. We walked down the trail, and we stopped for about 5 minutes when out of nowhere, we had heard a loud howl or screeching sound all around us. We immediately turned on our flashlights and began scouring the area. We spotted nothing, but as we walked, we heard a second screech that sounded like it was coming from behind us. Now we were near the edge of a cliff about 40 feet above where a creek had flowed. The screams had continued on for about 10 minutes and then stopped. As we sat there in silence, I told my friend, "You know what? I'm done. I'm leaving." We then decided to pack up our gear together and head back to our vehicle, which was parked at the trailhead, roughly 3 miles away from the spot in which we were camping. As we hiked back, we kept hearing footsteps behind us, but every time that we turned around, we could not see anything in the dark, but felt like something was following us. We eventually made it back to our vehicle and left. I've been camping since I was a child and have never encountered anything so extreme. The scream or howl was that of a mix between an owl and a mountain lion. Also, the footstep sounds were strange too. They sounded human. This was just my very first experience. The second one I had is when I just started working for the National Forest Service as a ranger. At the time, I was working at the Grand Canyon National Park, doing some late-night trail work around 7 p.m. near the South Kaibab trailhead, when I saw a coyote walking around in a circle. I stood there watching it in disbelief, and it began to growl, then stand up on its hind legs, staring directly at me with these eyes that were glowing red, like a demon's from a 1980s horror movie. I immediately radioed to the ranger station, and within minutes, 4 other rangers arrived on scene. While I was speaking to one of them, another ranger noticed something moving off the trail in the brush 50 yards away from us. He shined his flashlight at it, and we could see that whatever it was quickly moving off into the trees. The other 3 rangers left with me, but when we got back to where I saw this coyote, there were no tracks or signs that a coyote had been there at all. We speculate, knowing what it was, that it was performing some sort of ritual. However, that's mere speculation. What I do know is that whatever it was, it wanted me to see something. And when the other ranger shined his light on whatever it was, it moved off into the trees. Now, I wanted to share with you the very last experience I had. This was in 2018 during the spring, and was easily the most terrifying of all 3 accounts thus far. I was working with a team of other rangers at the Grand Canyon National Park. It was later one evening, around 9:30. We were doing a patrol of the South Rim area along the Desert View Drive. We were about halfway through our route when my partner radioed to me saying that he had seen something moving in an open field off to our right near some cliffs. I immediately drove up there, parked my Jeep, and got out my spotlight. I scanned the area and noticed something standing in an open field. When I shined my light on it, and when the beam hit its eyes, it lit up and reflected back at me, just like a cat's would. What I seen was a very tall creature that reminded me of a wolf. So I radioed my partner and told him to get out here, since I was alone. He asked me where I was, and after a while of not hearing from him, I walked to my Jeep to search for his radio signal. When I got back in the Jeep, it immediately started on its own. At that very moment, this dark gray wolf-like creature leapt over the barbed wire fence, snuck up behind my Jeep while I was looking at my radio signal and my partner's location, and peered at me through the passenger side window right as I was flicking my radio to go back to channel 2. I could see its glowing eyes staring at me. Then it moved around to the other side of the Jeep and stared at me again on my driver's side window. Not like it wanted to do anything, but it felt more like a taunt to put me in my place. I had no idea what was going on, but I was so terrified I was paralyzed with fear. I literally could not move. I was hyperventilating while sitting there in the driver's seat. At this point, another ranger showed up and immediately also noticed this wolf-like creature trying to get into my vehicle. He opened his door, but the moment he did, this thing went to attack, ripping off one of the mirrors and then smashed a side window, just as 2 more rangers had arrived on scene. These 2 both shot at it, but it didn't seem to hit anything because when they arrived, it was already quickly fleeing. The ranger that it attacked said he thought that this wolf-like creature was actually a skinwalker in disguise as a coyote. Now, I personally checked the area where I saw the wolf after everything had eventually calmed down, and there were no tracks. No human or coyote imprints whatsoever. And to be honest, right before I looked over onto my partner's radio frequency and heard his voice, something told me to look at my dash cam, which records while driving my Jeep. However, when I went in to look the next day, there was nothing there. In fact, my dash camera somehow stopped recording about 5 minutes before all this craziness had unfolded. I believe that whatever this thing or creature is, thought we were going to be onto it in my initial radio call to my partner, so it decided to scare and intimidate me as to not reveal its location. The other ranger who had arrived on scene said he told the 2 other rangers who shot at the werewolf dog to drop out of it, because if he knew what was going on, and confirmed that I wasn't just messing with them. However, they did not listen. Another ranger had to direct one of them, while the other was told by a senior officer, which is when they stopped shooting. This incident in particular marked my last work shift for a long time. This was an attack from what I strongly believe to be a skinwalker or some other supernatural being. I am forwarding this story for your YouTube. I hope you are well and have had a pleasant Halloween. Here is my brief eyewitness account of something that happened to me many years ago at the Grand Canyon. First, I am a National Park Ranger, and in the summer of '99, worked at the Grand Canyon North Rim. My duties were working as a backcountry ranger, detailed on backcountry wilderness routes, such as those along the North Kaibab Trail. I took it very seriously to stay in shape for this kind of ranger duty, and I was still training for the Grand Canyon Marathon. I like to do my long runs at twilight, usually a 12-hour shift that ends at midnight. This night, I requested an end run on the North Kaibab Trail, about 20 to 23 mile loop, with 6 were off trail. French Hill and Ribbon Falls. I hiked into the park from Jacob Lake Road and carried my pack all day through 8 miles to Cottonwood Campground, picked up and dropped my bag. From there, I did French Hill and Ribbon Falls. It was now approaching the color show in the sky from sun setting behind the park to my east. I decided to head back toward Bright Angel Campground. Running is not allowed on the Bright Angel Trail after dark. However, I thought there would be few hikers or campers out there to see me. It would take me a couple to 3 hours to get back via the rim. So, I headed down into the canyon after dark. I've done many night runs in my years of training, and with this trail, it was still a light show overhead from occasional clouds coming over the Grand Canyon and allowing starlight from above the rim to illuminate parts of this trail. I passed Horseshoe Mesa, heading down for Phantom Ranch. I have not done many loop trips, but had gone out to a good pace and knew that by now it was roughly 11:30 p.m., and I still had a couple hours to go. A few times on the wide portion of this trail over Horseshoe Mesa is where I would cross alone. There were no headlamps down in the abyss, unlike my hike up with a lot of day hikers. I would look at the canyon to my left and just heard some noises popping, cracking and blowing from the abyss. When I say these sounds were coming out of the darkness of the abyss, I only saw the occasional pinpoints of light being shined up in my direction, mainly from campers below. Seeing how dark it was down there and hearing these noises in the darkness gave me a feeling like I was not alone out on this trail, that somebody was down there, in intermittent spots where I would shine my headlamp of warning to the abyss, and seeing of all these pinpoints of light on their drop-off campers' tents at Phantom Reach. This would relieve my paranoia, and I could again proceed further down and feeling comforted by the National Park Rangers that had their midnight campout at Phantom Reach overnight. About 1/2 hour later, I descended a switchback and approached on a little plateau just below Horseshoe Mesa. The time would be about 12:40 a.m. I stopped to put down my headlamp strap for a second and grabbed an energy bar from my jacket pocket. As I sat down, I heard what sounded like squirrels moving around behind me in a bush. I often heard the bobcats and ferrets running off around here, so I turned my head to the side of the bush and then heard branch ends rupture against each other. I turned back toward the trail, just having finished with my energy bar, and began going downward, back into the abyss. As long as this was an operational park route and well-maintained, I thought it must be rangers from Phantom Reach delivering me on a tactical role. So, thinking this was actually a little better and hoping that I would see some human light soon affixed to the horizon to show me how far it is over Cliff Springs. About 30 to 40 minutes after that, I had passed all of the thick vegetation of Horseshoe Mesa. I was passing through more subparks on the upper edge of Shinuma Canyon, and it dawned on me suddenly how dark this narrow canyon looked, with no blockage, no clouds at all to block any light. It seemed unusually dark, which I thought was weird. I then began to hear more strange noises, like metal grinding on metal, and thinking again that perhaps I was just having auditory hallucinations, but these were strange. Sometimes I would hear what sounded like an owl calling from the distance, but very, very deep, and weird chirping, popping, and banging noises and pops in the darkness around me, like electrical pops or wiring pops, but on a much louder scale. The more and more it went on, the more and more I realized how out of place it was, and I was beginning to feel something again. Like not alone or being watched, but something was wrong. So now, I could not see any of my trail companions ahead, and my paranoia rose more. I can now not see anything but cliff edges to my right and the Roaring Springs Canyon to my left. It all felt strange at this point as I was past the lower part of this trail. Before I ran out of water at Grandview Point, I tried to stay as far on my left of this trail to the best of my north compass. My run was not the regular Thirsty Trail Marathon, perhaps running more 3 times through each night, but with no assistance. I began to feel the noises, more and more, sporadic and more behind me now. So I kept pushing ahead, forward to the trail, left, down Shinuma, somewhat stiffening my feet, pushing each rock in this valley. All that was now surrounding me were canyon edges and the stars above, re-illuminating below ridges and tight switchbacks when clouds would occasionally break up with that color show and the atmospheric light waves. I would make a decent pace, pushing into the silence. The stars overhead see my path going with reflective trail markers on my right shoulder. I came up through Shinuma Mesa, trying to stick in its left to the north. And finally, after running at a good pace with many rock-breathing breaks, I had finally made my way over Shinuma Mesa, out where I could see ahead for several miles. I began to look toward my right, and I saw several humanoid figures moving throughout an area where what appeared to be a ripple in the air, like a portal or something. My first thought was that I had done something to my head and this was a mirage, but it would not go away with my eye blinking. It only seemed to get more intense as I looked, and I began to feel very unsafe, like I had just witnessed something I was never supposed to see. Turned back the way I came. I ran as fast as I could and did not stop for breaks again until I passed Shinuma Mesa. It was now nearing 2:30 a.m. when I had run over this previous morning at about 11 a.m. As I was reaching 3, I was still running at a good pace, not seeing anybody ahead of me. I finally saw 2 hikers come toward me, one with a headlamp, and the other just walking with his hand outstretched, like he was tired and needed a hand. I ran up to them, asked if they had seen any rangers or anyone behind me on the trail, and they said no, but there were some campers at Granite Rapids who may have seen you going by. I told them of the phenomenon that I saw, and they weren't sure what to make of it. After all, they too had told me about the strange noises they had heard all night while walking on the trail, and how they had been felt like they were being watched. Something was going on. I have no way or idea to explain the experience that I had that night. I'm also sorry to say I have no pictures of this, as it was so dark. All I could think about was getting back. I hope this aids with your research. Thanks again. This woman I know had a cabin up in the foothills of northern Arizona. It was pretty remote, but not so remote that it would take days to locate you if you got lost or stranded. She and her husband were avid hikers and backpackers. They both kept up on their survival skills. Last year, in 2015, for some reason, she decided to go hiking alone into this very area where she had been many times before with him. Just out of the blue, decided to go alone one day, after work, instead of waiting until their usual hiking day, which was Saturday. She went down a mountainside by herself that involved some bushwhacking. No GPS or any communication device other than her cell phone, which had very poor service out there anyway. She had texted me on her way back out. She did not know, though, that I was into paranormal things and have also posted on many of these subreddits. She had texted me that she's lost. I asked her if she knew which way back to the trailhead, and she told me no. So, what did I tell her to do? Stay put or follow a creek? I told her exactly what not to do, because you can hike for miles in one direction without ever going anywhere, even looping back in a circle, just by following the water. And because of this very reason, people often get hopelessly lost out there in the woods, never seeing anyone again after calling for help. Either they were misdirected or they did not have GPS. She began hiking more and more until she had found a trail of water, which she followed until it got dark. But said that soon, everything began to look the same, and she wasn't sure what she should do anymore. That's when she had started to hear voices calling her name, but could not tell where it was coming from. There were no birds chirping, there were no crickets or frogs or anything like that. No signs of any animal life around. She was now getting scared, and even though she did have poor spotty signal, she was able to make use of an online compass on her phone, but she said the needle would randomly whack out and point her in different directions. It was not reliable, so she just did not use it altogether. I think her biggest mistake here was going out unarmed and unequipped properly. Eventually, she got lucky and found a back road, getting home a little after midnight. She said it was a long walk back to the car that night, since she had been hiking all day. But after recounting her experiences up there, she gets pretty creeped out anytime I want to bring it up. She said that she saw things moving off in the trees and things that really bothered her. Things that she has a hard time remembering and talking about. We had the chance to sit down over tea when she was telling me about how, at one point or another, she was convinced she was going to have to make camp out here and just wait until morning until there was light to explore further. She also did not have adequate food or other supplies, and she admits she does not know what she was thinking, and it was a huge mistake on her end to venture this far out without any or needed supplies. And that's when things got really creepy. She said, beyond hearing her name being called, one thing that really unsettled her was hearing these deep scratch marks in the tree near her, and the feeling like she was being watched or observed. She kept saying that at random points, she would just feel her hair stand up on end and her gut feeling scream at her, telling her she's not safe, and she needed to move quickly through the area to get out. As I've already said, this is a girl that's not really into the paranormal at all, nor does she really even acknowledge it, so for her to talk about this stuff is very interesting, to say the least. I mean, even she admits there's something going on up there in the mountains. Something that just wasn't normal. Because, already, she's hiked so much in her life and has experienced hundreds upon hundreds of hours out in the outdoors, and never had a weird experience like that, but she goes out once, is feeling overconfident, leaves behind equipment, and she has an experience like that has left her slightly traumatized. Not enough to never go back camping, but definitely not go back alone. For a period of time, I served as a member and volunteer of the fire department in my hometown. One night, while on duty as a firefighter, at the age of 18, I got called out to go to search for some hunters who had been reported missing. We were very close to where they reported missing, and we all knew them, so it was just one truck with 10 people that went out there. This was only about 5 or 6 miles from our station, and had no idea anything like this could happen, or even when it did, until later, when their bodies came up. We spent 3 hours searching for the guys, but never found them. So, after getting back to the station, We began hearing rumors from other volunteers at the station about how these guys were last seen walking towards an old abandoned farmhouse located in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods. Then, we had heard they were all found dead in the house, but nobody knew what happened. We had no idea at this point what really happened, so a few days later, our volunteer fire chief decided we would go out on an all-out search again because now there was evidence of something horrible having happened there. So, about 8 of us went out there after dark. The farmhouse again is located on top of a smaller hill, and began looking around the outside of this old abandoned farmhouse when my buddy, who was with me, just came running back down to where I was standing and asked if I'd smelt that too. I told him yes. He thought somebody else from the group should know, since we were standing there, looking at each other. Another guy came up running and was crying, telling us, "I think it's them." He walked us over to the edge, some woods about 50 yards away from where we were standing, and what I saw will stay with me forever. There were 5 bodies, all lined up under a tree that was about 10 feet tall at the top, with no leaves, so you could see right through this thing like a window in your house. The bodies were all stacked right next to each other, facing straight up. Each of them had blood coming out of their eyes and their nose, but the way they were all laying next to each other so peacefully. I apologize for this report being so short, but it still stuck out to me today as something that's greatly disturbed me, and I'm not sure what was the cause, because we never did find out. I think it was written down that it was possibly a bear attack, but I've seen bear attacks in my life, and this was nothing like an animal attack. I believe they were either murdered or possibly worse. In 1995, I was at the National Park Service during the summertime and worked at Big Thicket National Preserve in Texas. We were doing prescribed burns to clear brush and invasive plants. There was a ranger, me, and 2 firefighters on this particular burn, with one in the engine driving ahead of us, sloshing logs for the fire to move through. We were just about done for the day when I began hearing weird sounds coming from what looked like a small creek bed that ran from east to west through an area that we had burned earlier that morning. It sounded like someone or something was walking around, and very heavy. The movement sounded very off, like the person did not have any rhythm or cadence as they would normally walk. The other thing is it seemed hollow sounding. I know it doesn't make any sense, but that's how I heard it. The stream was maybe 15 to 20 feet wide and maybe 3 to 4 feet deep in the bed. As we approached the stream, I told my crew to stop the truck to see if they could hear what I was hearing. They both said they didn't hear anything, but I knew it was still there. It had gotten quieter as we got closer. You know how you can tell when an animal knows you're coming towards them. We waited for a couple of minutes, finally deciding to continue on with the day since we were almost done. 10 minutes later, I began hearing these sounds again, so this time, my crew heard them too, and freaked out. While one firefighter went for a shotgun in the back of our truck, me and another firefighter walked up to the stream banks about 100 yards apart from each other. So whatever was making those sounds could not sneak up behind us at all. We thought it might be a bear. The third guy ran back to our truck and grabbed his pistol, just in case anything would happen. As soon as he got into our brush rig, my partner who was with me shouted that he saw something running through some tall grass across from him along the bank creek bed towards some more dense brush area, to where I also noticed movement inside bushes. Whatever this thing was or wasn't was running on 2 legs and still made that hollow sound while running, like your knees weren't bending properly. And due to its long, gangly arms swinging wildly from side to side, it made it hard to gauge the speed. My partner yelled, "I see it too," pointing at what looked to be the exact same creature crossing over the stream, going deeper into a thicketed area. And suddenly, all 3 of us heard a loud yelping, screaming, and then a loud crash followed by silence, except for crackling and popping noises, coming from the direction the creature had disappeared into. We had no idea what we were up against, or if this thing could come back. Then things got a little crazy. All 3 of us ran back to the brush truck, while one guy stayed in the vehicle with his pistol and spotlight drawn, told our driver to hit it fast out of there. We were less than a half-mile from the main trailhead where we were parked that morning, but still had well over another half-hour drive ahead of us before arriving back at base camp. When we got back, everybody was wondering what had happened. They had all heard our brush truck roaring through gravel road, like crazy, coming down the mountain road towards the park headquarters. Everybody wanted to know what happened because none of them had saw or heard anything unusual. Even then, nobody really wanted to talk about it, except maybe a few people who claimed they saw or experienced something weird. However, they were afraid to go into more detail, due to being called crazy and potential backlash onto their career. Over the following few days, I began conversing with some coworkers. I found out that this wasn't the first time someone encountered something strange in the Big Thicket National Preserve either. One ranger whom I spoke to claimed he was driving across East Texas Highway 59, where he was telling me he encountered a creature similar to what we described. Almost makes you wonder, what are some things that are out there? If you enjoyed today's stories, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below for more narrations just like this one.